that correct?
That's correct.
All right. What actions have been taken to ensure that removals are written to the highest possible standard? I know you kind of answered that, but I really want to punch this home because I think it's important.
Thanks. That is why we've required people to pass this training prior to being able to write the removal. One of the items that the NTSB has noted, and we noted as well, is that in looking at the consistency of our written removals, they are not the level of consistency that we would like. When they're there, there's not the level of proficiency and consistency in writing it. So that's why we've improved the training, and then we did that. That's why we put the assessment process in there, to make sure that before someone can write a removal, they can pass an assessment about what should be in a removal, what's the right process, what's it mean, that there's a level of proficiency, and that, as well as the quality okay to remove. The quality inspector now also will look at that paperwork and make sure that it's right and we're good to go before we start removing things from the airplane. So those are the primary two steps to address that very issue.
Thank you. That concludes the questions from the technical panel. Mr. Breezy, back to you.
Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. We're going to start with questions from the parties, and same process, and we will start with Alpa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our question is of Boeing. How many of the MAX post-accidents med plug inspections revealed problems with the original med installation?
I don't have that data on me that started with the original MED plug installation. I don't know that answer.
Okay, have any of your customers reported 737-900ER MED plug installation faults during heavy inspections? If it's the same door as previously testified.
Not that I am aware of. I do know that when we went out and did the inspections after the accident, we included the 900ER in those inspections, and we found some of the similar issues on the 900ER that we had on the MAX. But that is not the same as a heavy inspection, to your exact question.
We're aware of multiple MED plug installation irregularities discovered during the post-accident MAX grounding inspections, as you previously pointed out, including the right-hand MED plug of the accident aircraft. We'd like to know what Boeing is doing to ensure that they and their suppliers are providing a defect-free aircraft to the traveling public.
Thank you. As a result of our findings, that is why we've taken many of the steps that we have taken. So first, earlier in panel one, both Doug, my colleague from Boeing, and Spirit discussed the enhanced inspections at Spirit involving the plug, the oversight of the inspections, the end-of-line inspections, and then when it comes to Boeing, we are doing additional inspections of those mid-exit plugs as well. At the end of line, we operate what we called the MOM. A MOM stands for a multi-operator message. This MOM was put out after the accident for the fleet to all go re-inspect their door, open it, make sure it's all good. Everything's good. We do that on every aircraft now at the end of our production system. So we still implement that final inspection to ensure that the mid-exit door plug is good. In terms of the other findings and discrepancies that were found, those are the ones that we have worked back one by one. This is why we've implemented our in-process inspections. We've implemented all of these potential issues that we saw, the real issues we saw in the fleet that potentially happen again. And those are in our end-of-line inspections that we now check for at Spirit as well. We've worked them back. We've added inspections at Spirit trying to come to ensure that we don't find any of those same issues again.
Thank you. My next question is for Spirit. From the NTSB Manufacturing Records Report, there were 26 Spirit Aerosystems personnel employed at the Boeing assembly facility, including 2 quality assurance personnel that did not recognize the fault with the rivets. From the first nonconformance record, the rivets were painted over and not repaired, resulting in a second nonconformance record. Were none of these employees at Boeing trained to inspect rivets, identify damaged rivets, and repair these rivets properly?
Yes, as I previously mentioned, the Spirit mechanic the contractor mechanic made an error in the statement that he had applied to the initial inspection, the initial documentation. The Spirit quality assurance contractor, they will normally work right alongside the mechanics. I believe that error transferred over into the application of the stamp on the inspector's part as well. The reviewing I think if you wanted to pull up one of the images, I think it's 11C, page 13, that does show one of the rivets painted. Based on the discussion with the mechanics, I believe they felt the rivets were acceptable. That may have required removal of paint, the secondary primer application, and then reapply paint. And then that's why they then stated on the Boeing unauthorized rework pickup that they believe that the rivets met the requirements. I think that's image 3. I think I was referring to image 4, but yeah. So that's why based on that image, that's why I believe that they felt the rivets, and that's a number 5 rivet. That's a very small rivet, so you're looking at a blown up image. But that's why I believe that they felt that the rivet tails were acceptable, and why they then applied that information on the unauthorized rework pickup. But they are the training for the inspectors that is completed by the Spirit Wichita trainer would also go over these types of inspection, the BAC 5004-1-2, for fastener installation.
Final question, are the mechanics and the QA inspector not independent?
How do you mean?
Are they the same employee line, same, they both approve the same piece of work? Are they independent? Do they walk from a different department group, or are they sitting next to each other?
They are
signing off the same item.
They have a Spirit area within the Boeing factory that they work out of, but the Spirit contract mechanic is only able to stamp off on the contract, or the mechanic operations, and the Spirit QA is at the time was only able to stamp off on the QA operations, and it identified their stamps independently within the Boeing CMIS system.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. We will now go to Alaska Airlines.
Thank you, Chair Hamady. A couple of questions for clarity. We talked about the initial rig, Spirit, and not necessarily having training, but looking at fit and flush. And now we're in the Boeing factory. We talked about the final fit. So, Ms. Lund, what flow day is that final fit done by, and who is it done by?
There are two times we check it in our factory. The final one is obviously the latter, but there are some things we check for the final time earlier. In flow day 1 or 2, we do the rig check of the fuselage. We check it on the outside of the fuselage and the inside of the fuselage. That is done by our door crew. The airplane then proceeds down the line and becomes an airplane. It gets the weight on wheels, as Mr. Riney referenced. It flows down the process, and on flow day 9, the next to the last day in our factory, we do the final fit and fare, and that is an external only check. So our final internal rig check for gaps, et cetera, is done in the structures tool up front. The final fit and fare check on the exterior that we check after the weight on wheels is done in flow day 9, both by our door experts.
Thank you. And both of those are also pressure checks, right?
The
Low and high?
The pressure check is actually done on flow day 7, I believe, pressure testing. That is where we pressurize the aircraft. We want to do that final check after the pressure testing to make sure that it's not moved and when it's seated or pressurized. So our pressure check of the aircraft is done on flow day 7 prior to our final external check on flow day 9.
I appreciate that. That's good information. On flow day 9, as we do this check and we find some additional rigging that needs to happen, is that going to be my door crew or is that another workforce?
Your door experts, again, your door crew.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Riney, you talked about Puget Sound area having some great technical experts to bring in as contractors. I agree with that. A great place to be. Are most of these previous Boeing employees?
They can be, or they can also, I think this is what we've seen after COVID. There's been an increased number of whether retirees from Boeing or even retirees from Spirit that have gone to contracting. And so that's where we can then pull from for immediate, highly skilled individuals to get into our workforce in Renton quickly.
I think that's great to use that resource. Is your training solid enough to let them know that the role has changed and the tribal knowledge, as you might say, of process has changed as a contractor for Spirit?
So I don't believe that we deal with tribal knowledge in our specific situation in Renton because it is strictly focused around rework. So with the majority of our team specializing in fastener removal and replacement, or some small structure replacement or tool mark blends, that type of thing, it's not something that I believe lends itself to tribal knowledge, but more hands-on experience.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. No further questions.
Thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break and come back and start with the Association of Flight Attendants. All right, how we doing? Ready to go? All right. We have a couple of clarifications that the technical panel wants to ask about before we go to the Association of Flight Attendants. So, technical panel.
Miss Lund, why do you say that the move crew closed the left-hand MED plug on 8789?
I said it, we think, we don't know definitively. My understanding in reviewing the transcripts and the interviews with the move crew, they have stated that they believe they pushed the door to.
So to clarify on that, I was part of those interviews.
Yes.
The timing for when they actually pulled the plug mostly shut, he said he left a gap, was actually the 18th. So it was the evening of the 18th when they needed to get weight on wheels so that they could set the height of the struts. And they had to move the stand away from the MED plug door in order to put weight on wheels. So they had to get the stand away. And in order to get the stand away, they had to support the left-hand MED plug off of the stand in the, I'll call it, almost closed position. And I came to the same conclusion you did initially. And then when we went through with the timing, it actually turns out it was on the night of the 18th and not on the night of the 19th. So the transcript does talk about him saying that he pulled it almost closed. And that is part of the docket and that is available. But it happened on the 18th and not the 19th, and we have no knowledge, and I hope if you have knowledge, please share it, We have no knowledge of who closed the plug on the 19th. And I want to understand if you know something that I don't.
I do not have any knowledge beyond what you described. I will certainly go back and review those exact dates, but I don't have knowledge beyond what the interviews that you just described as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that the transcripts show that it was reopened. That at some point it was closed, but not totally closed on the 18th and would have been reopened.
Reopened on the 19th to complete the rivet rework.
Right.
That is correct. And on the
Yes.
19th, the river rework was done and completed by roughly 6:30 in the evening.
Correct.
And all of that happened well after the weight was put back on wheels and the door had to be reopened in order to do that. So thank you.
Correct. I agree with my reading of that as well. Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. AFA, Mr. Heibel.
Just a clarification on the inspection of the door bolts, not necessarily specific to this aircraft, but after the aircraft is delivered by Spirit to Boeing, are the bolts inspected prior to them being covered? If there's no rework done, or is it in the work?
Pre-accident, in September, they would have been reviewed and inspected in two portions. Number one is the rigging area where they're looking exactly at that part of the plug. I believe it would be noticed during that rigging if something was not right with the door on the inside. The second portion during that same time, as described very nicely by Mr. Catlin earlier, when we call it okay to close, there is an okay to close effort also done upon a removal of the airplane. That's how it was done then. Now we have a specific review for the bolts themselves and the plug.
Thank you for that review. And if you can entertain just another question about lubricant, does Boeing provide guidance to operators and contract maintenance for what lubricant to use when closing the med door plug after maintenance for the MAX 9 and the 737-900ER?
I've not checked the maintenance document for that specifically, and so I cannot answer that specific question.
Okay. And then to both of you, there seemed to be a bit of a discrepancy about the labor market in Northwest Washington. Boeing described a dearth of qualified candidates, and Barrett describes a surplus. Is that just a difference in qualifications that you're looking for, or can you help us understand?
So for Spirit, what I described was after COVID, there was an increase in the availability of contractors. It appeared that either retirees from Boeing or MROs or that type of thing in the area would allow us to quickly pull those types of resources. I can't speak to those seeking full-time employment direct to Boeing, though.
Which is what all of our jobs are. They are full-time IAM represented hourly employees in the Puget Sound. And so it would potentially, I don't know, but potentially not necessarily be the exact same people who want to come work permanently versus a contract.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gerlach.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. The first one, when the FAA issued the airworthiness directive that referenced the MOM, did you all go back and perform that AD on the production airplanes in the factory?
Yes, we did.
And then the next question I have for you, there was a Boeing employee, a team lead, door team lead. He stated that we do not open and close these door plugs. It's not something that we do. Did you say that there's a different door team that does that and not this particular one? It's in the transcripts, one of the interviews.
I would need to go back and reference exactly what he says. It is not their baseline statement of work to open and close it. That is a true statement for sure, as we've mentioned. If the rig is correct and it holds, nothing happens through transportation or the build of the aircraft. On most airplanes, and you've seen this as well, the plug does not need to be opened. But there are occasions where it needs to be open, and I believe that the door crew is responsible for opening the plug in the case it needs to be open, not baseline work, but when it needs to be open.
And in his transcripts, in the interview, it says that he referenced AOG and SST as being responsible for opening and closing the door plug.
Our AOG and SST mechanics are, it's a group of highly trained mechanics. Our AOG team obviously is the team we send out on the road when an aircraft is AOG or when we need a highly skilled group of employees that can do multi-skilled work function out on the road, including some of the door crews. SST is a similar group to that, maybe not quite as highly skilled as broadly as AOG, but very highly skilled. We pull them from experienced mechanics. And so we, with the right training, can use AOG and SST to do those skills as well. We pull SST and AOG in to do what I'll call non-baseline work frequently in order to allow our actual employees to stay on the job. So I do know that we use AOG and SST. As you can imagine, AOG is not always available. Sometimes they are. SST is usually more available sometimes, but depending on their workload as well. But I do believe those employees are capable of doing it.
Right, so in all likelihood, they would have been the appropriate organization to go to have it open and closed?
We could have called them
Okay.
appropriately, yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you very much, Machinist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Ms. Lund. So we do see through the SAT data that there was confusion about the removal process on line 8789. My question is about the okay to install the blankets. Is it clear to Boeing that the okay to install the blankets that was complete and then had to be opened would have required a removal as well?
Clarification on my review of the data. My review of the data showed that when we did the okay to install the blankets, that it was complete less, stamped by the mechanic and the inspector, complete less the area around the plug where the NCR was. So it was not stamped off complete, it was complete less that area, which is a process, as you know, John, that we are allowed to do so that the rest of the work in the area can continue, but the final stamp doesn't get applied until that final work gets done. And I believe that in the case of this airplane, it was complete less by manufacturing and quality in that area.
Our evaluation showed that the blanket install was stamped complete on 9/1, even though the fasteners had to continue to be worked. And maybe that needs to be looked at.
I think it does, just as a point of reference, when we went out at lunch, and I heard this conversation, I had the team go look again. We believe it's complete less. We should go look at that and get clear on that.
Okay. When earlier there was discussion around removal or opening of the MED plug, is that terminology, do you believe that terminology to open or to remove, is that, you said it was interchangeable?
I have heard both. I have heard both. I believe we have heard removal because there are parts that are needed or removal is needed, the opening because the bottom can still be there. There's clearly the option to actually remove the entire plug itself. That was not done. I have heard people use both.
I've heard you mention your company is working on, training and other corrective actions to solve these issues in the future. Because there was SAT traffic with management and other salaried folks in the LSCC on whether a removal was required. Is some of that corrective action or training also being provided for management?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
We have, as a part of our improvements activities, there is a training for our first level managers, first, second, and third level managers both. And a portion of that is leadership training that we're doing a great deal on it. And a part of that is technical training, including the technical aspects of our policies and procedures to reinforce and train on those very issues as well.
Thank you. This question is for Mr. Riney. When you were speaking about receiving products supplied by a supplier with source delegated inspection, what is the inspection process that you use, that Spirit uses to receive parts or assemblies from a supplier with source delegated inspection?
Yeah, so normally that will entail, as part of the receival process, inspection of the paperwork to ensure that the parts shipped align with the parts being delivered, along with a visual inspection to ensure no damage occurred during shipping. But that's the extent of the inspection. We don't conform the incoming product.
Okay. I would ask Ms. Lund the same on parts or assemblies that are brought in from the supply chain from a supplier with source delegated inspection authority. What kind of inspections are in place for receiving, and what process, do you know what process is used to complete that inspection?
If it is source delegated with no probation or any other kinds of corrective actions coming from the Boeing company, my expectation would be that the inspection is done at the supplier, and then we will do an initial receiving inspection when it arrives at Boeing, be it certainly an ID and damage, and an initial visual inspection of parts when they arrive. And then, of course, there's the oversight process we talked about earlier with things evaluated as possible. That, of course, does not necessarily apply to a Spirit, as we've discussed earlier, with that is just such a large supplier, it's a little bit different.
And is it different because Spirit had many defects that you were aware of and trying to work to track down?
Yes, and we had been working it, as was discussed earlier, with Spirit. We had increased our presence and we had increased our oversight. So yes, due to that, certainly since the accident, and it's always been a little different with Spirit. They obviously they are our largest supplier by far. They provide the entire fuselage. The amount of work that's done is very large, and we have always had some permanent on-site presence at Spirit, which we do not everywhere.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Meyer with Spirit Aerosystems.
So this question's for Mr. Riney. So are there cases, Mr. Riney, where Spirit and Boeing disagree on what a defect is?
Yes, I don't believe that's uncommon. There are certainly some of the defect write-ups that we see. They may not be completely clear, may not have all the details of the specification, and after investigation by our team, determine that the items do meet the specification, and then we are able to show where in the spec that they would meet that. And it does go both ways, though. There are some items that we agree on, and then there are some items that we just don't end up agreeing on.
So can you give me some examples of those type of items where we might not agree on what a defect is?
One specific one, like we showed in the photo, it could be actually a cosmetic defect that's not fit, form, and function wise. It doesn't actually detract from the installation. And if there's not specific measurements included in the write-up, that type of information could be the whether the defect is a true defect or not.
So in Renton, if there's a disagreement that we can't meet resolution, who's the final decision maker in the Boeing quality system?
As you mentioned, because it is Boeing's QMS, they have final say on whether the item gets worked or not.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you, Captain Jangelis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Ms. Lund. During the investigation, it was discussed how common the removal of the plug is. How often are mid-exit door plugs removed from an aircraft?
In the production system,
Yes.
the 62 times were the number of times that we found. It is not what I would call normal. That is not a large number of instances. And so only when there is a reason that is out of the normal. Most airplanes will not have that mid-exit door plug opened. And then in maintenance, it's opened as after a number of years to check the structure under a major structural check, but not frequently there either.
And thank you. When reinstalling the mid-exit door, can you reinstall the old and removed hardware, or is it a new set of unused parts, and are those required?
In terms of the bolts themselves, we've had this discussion. In order to reinstall the previous bolts, they would need to be conforming with no issues, no defects, no signs of wear of the previous installation. When we were doing our MOM in production and continue to, we have been using new hardware. We had the conversation if the previous existing hardware could be used. And the answer that I received is if it was fully conforming with no defects and exactly the right part, it could have been reused, but we were installing new parts in that case.
Is it different on the assembly line versus on the ramp? And what verification process are mechanics using to keep track of removed parts and ensure that all parts get reinstalled?
Our processes are the same in the manufacturing system and on the ramp. The primary difference would be on the ramp, typically more parts are installed and you may have to remove more parts. Obviously in the build, maybe something's not covered up, it hasn't already been built out. On the ramp, if you need to access something, removals may be more frequent. The process is the same. The BPI is the same. The process is the same. When parts are removed, they should be removed. There should be paperwork with them and placed on a work-in-process rack, which is where they are housed. Again, I will talk about the way it was in September of 2023. The parts were labeled to go on the rack. There's a required tag that has to go on it that has the part number and the IP number and the employee's name, who's working on the job or has taken them off and then put on the rack appropriately. In our improvement activities, we are in the process of rolling out and have done it across one line in the 37 factory and are now expanding a more electronic bar chart type system that keeps that track of those parts more electronically, allows us to know exactly where the parts are and better traceability and compliance to filling out the paperwork with those parts as well. So that's one of the improvements we have made.
So better parts tracking, is there a task card specific to the removal and reinstallation of the mid-exit door that the Boeing door team would have available to them that details all the steps required to perform the task?
When a removal is needed, there will be steps, or if required, what those steps are to remove them. Engineering can provide that. Manufacturing engineering can provide that if it's required to do that as part of the removal documentation. One of the complexities of our removal system is, this came up sometimes, there are two forms. There's a long form and a short form. Things that need retesting, that need questions from engineering, that need a lot of instructions, those go on the long form. And that is the kind of material that is provided on that form. The short form is something that would be very simple. I'll say a ceiling panel could be removed and then reinstalled without a retest, a seat bottom cushion, although that's an exempt one, but something that could be very simple to install or reinstall without a full retest or engineering statement of work.
So to confirm my last question, task card meaning a list, a checklist of items that they do when they do work with the door, is it's not based on mechanic knowledge or experience. There is a list of steps to do this process.
My understanding is, and I need to validate this, but that that is provided to the mechanic for items on the long form particularly. Yes, such as the plug.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Alaska. Mr. Tidwell.
Thank you, Chair Hammond. A couple of quick questions. Ms. Lund, can you talk me through the Tier 1, 2, 3 review process? And let's get specific to the status or what would have been elevated with the door removal and how it was resolved. And was it resolved at the right level in the process as it was defined then? Is that process the same today?
The tier 1, 2, and 3, we have an actual team meetings at the start of shift. Tier 1 is really the meeting between a manager and their crew. It's the start of shift crew meeting. You talk about what you need, what's going on in your crew. That's the baseline. Every day on first and second shift, there is then an escalating level of tiers. There is a meeting where the first levels meet with their senior manager. There's a meeting where the senior managers and executives meet across the factory. And then there's a tier 4 where it gets elevated to the highest level executives on the program. Mostly things get worked at the team meeting. When they go to a tier 2, an example of something that would go to a tier 2 is if an employee in flow day 6 needs help from an employee in flow day 3. At the tier 2, they would get together and say, hey, I need your guy from flow day 3 to come down here and help me do this work. And they would talk about the priority. So the people downline would say, yep, I'll prioritize somebody, get it down there to you. And so what happened in this case is it wasn't getting done. Mike attends some of our tier meetings. I've been at many a tier meeting with Mike. And if there is a spirit item that's been elevated for help and we need help, we often say to Mike at the tier meeting, Mike, we need you to reprioritize this. We need somebody working on this job today. And so the tier meeting is effective in that way. It's a communication tool. If something is lingering, it allows management visibility to get it done. So in that way, our tier meetings continue and they're an important way of communicating across our factory. The part that did not work well is just how long it took to get this issue resolved. We've talked about the back and forth between whether the initial submittals were acceptable to Boeing. Mike is right, it is ultimately a Boeing call. It was not acceptable to Boeing. That went on too long. We've talked about that and are in agreement that it can't last that long. But once we got to the tier 2 and 3, I think the tier 2 was on a Friday, the tier 3 was Sunday, the work started and started moving. That part in getting help started to move. We need these things to not drag out that long. That part was not successful. It didn't work well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Riney, do you have any different perspective on that?
No, I think when things are elevated, and as Ms. Lund spoke to, I do attend those meetings. When there are help needed requests, the only issue for us is we always will look to help from, while we may be asked for help, we will in turn always be asking for help from Boeing if there's access or that type of thing that's needed.
Okay, great, thank you. One more thing on the lockout tagout program. Truly is a safety program, knowing who's on the barge or whatever their position is. It seemed like there was some different perceptions on how that process is used on the floor. Is this something that you audit or you're able to take a look at and see what the compliance rate is from a safety perspective, not necessarily what are the technicians, truly a safety perspective? Is that being reviewed?
It is being reviewed, and that's one of the, it's being reviewed. The role that I talked about earlier called a GC is the person who helps us control this on each aircraft. We are looking at the GC project process. I will tell you, it's stronger right now in Everett than it is in Renton. We're retraining, we're strengthening across all locations, but particularly in Renton, we've gone back to the documentation, and we are conducting audits. We're conducting compliance audits on the factory floor to ensure that we are complying with that LOTO program. That LOTO program, to your point, is safety. It is the key of keeping our employees safe, and we're really passionate about making sure that the airplane's safe before we have people work on it.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much. AFA.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Lund, you talked about concerns being elevated to management, tiers 2 and 3 via the SAT. Can you help us understand why CMS isn't also used to document those concerns? Since SAT is described as a communication tool primarily.
CMS is the system where the work is documented on. So anytime we work on an installation plan, a rejection tag, that is in CMS. That's the system that shows what work was done on the airplane, the employees that did it, that it was complete, that our jobs are complete, that our airplane was built complete. In terms of saying, hey, this is a priority, could you get somebody down here? That is what we use the SAT system for, because that is the communication. It's not the record that I did it, but saying, this has really turned hot. I need somebody down here, or I found something, and I need somebody who has this skill that resides back in a different part of the factory. And so it's the way we ask for help or talk about the communication when we find something, whereas CMS is really the record of the work that was done on the airplane. Maybe not the ask for help that came, but the work that was done on an airplane. That's the way the systems are set up.
Thank you for the clarification. No more questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. FAA.
Thank you, Chair. So going back to my previous questions about AOG and SST, would they have been required to write paper, the required removal paper, open and close that door? Would that have been in CMAS?
Yes.
That's the only question I have for you. Thank you very much.
IAM.
Again, on the process to determine whether removal was necessary, it was elevated. Was it elevated from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 to make that decision? Is that what the elevation within the SAT system was referring to, on who was going to make the decision for a removal?
My reading of the elevation of the SAT system was to get the work done. It was the people saying, we need this rivet rework done. The conversation came as the people were talking back and forth about, okay, what is it? Which model is it? Do we need a removal? It wasn't the elevation to get the decision. It was the elevation to get the work completed as it continued to proceed down the factory floor.
Thank you.
No more questions for IAM. Spirit.
No questions, Chair.
ALPA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question's for Mr. Riney. Your comments earlier, you noted that your contract employees are changed with the fluctuating demand. Given that, how do you keep track of who's been trained on what tasks like door removal and installation?
So again, none of the Spirit contractors would do any door removals. The tasks that they would be assigned would be more rework related, whether it's, again, some examples, mislocated brackets, open holes, pull marks, that type of thing. That type of skill or that type of, the initial training or their onboarding would determine that from their resume and the assessment that's performed now. There's an assessment performed in Wichita and then an additional assessment performed in Renton by Boeing.
Earlier you stated that you only require sheet metal experience when you hire an inspector. Does an inspector have more specialized experience applicable to what they're inspecting?
So for the hiring of the inspectors, it would be their inspection history or what work they performed as an inspector. Of course, due to the type of work that we're performing, it would lend itself to be those types of MRO or previous Boeing work history, that type of thing. Not necessarily a specific inspection job that they may have had.
So to confirm, it's not just sheet metal experience you're looking for in your inspector.
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Alaska,
No questions at this time. Thank you.
AFA,
No further questions.
right? FAA.
Yeah, two quick questions. You mentioned the pre-rig, that's done by Spirit, is that correct, Mr. Riney?
Correct.
And then there is the final rig on the door plug, and that is done by Boeing?
Boeing.
And who does that final rig? And it's a Boeing employee, but what part of the team?
A door employee.
So the door team does the final rig? Okay, thank you. For all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IAM.
No further questions.
Spirit,
No further questions, Chair.
ALPA.
No further questions.
Anyone else have questions? All right, moving to the Board of Inquiry. Can you pull up Exhibit 11D? While she pulls that up, I do have a couple of questions just to clarify. We do not know specifically when or who when this door plug was opened, and we do not know by whom.
Correct.
Same with closure.
Correct.
Okay, great. What I want to know is what happened to the hardware. So typically, when hardware comes out, you open a door and hardware comes out, where does it go?
It goes on our work in process rack.
And I heard you say you had a policy to use new hardware. So hardware that would be removed, would that be discarded, or I may have misunderstood that?
That is what we have done on this plug when we are doing our mom, now that we, post-accident, when we are fundamentally taking it out every time, double checking it, putting it back together. That's when we are always using the new hardware. When I inquired, would it have had to have been in the past? That was the answer I was given. If the hardware is in perfect condition, fully conforming, it could have been used again.
So it could have been used again on this plug.
Had it been in perfect condition, correct.
And in this case, if that, was that clear with all employees that you would reuse that hardware, or some employees might discard the hardware and get new hardware?
It could happen either way.
Okay.
Our general approach is when you take something off an airplane, you check to make sure that it's still fully conforming. That's a check that an employee does. If it has a non-conformance on it, it gets processed differently. It has a tag that goes with it. It gets put in a different process and either reworked or scrapped, discarded. If it's in perfect condition, it goes on the work in process rack and can be reused and reinstalled.
We do not have hardware for this door plug.
That is correct.
Okay, great. On the shipside action tracker, which I know is very redacted here, but I'm going to ask some questions. And just going back to some previous responses, I just want to clarify. The actions here started on September 1st. I just had them, Leonie, move up to the 12th because I have some questions. Around the 12th is when access started to be discussed. I know earlier you said there was some discussion of whether it was a door plug or a door. I don't see that in the unredacted version. So I see there's a lot of references to access. Access is needed or no access is provided. Then I see a lot of references to door, but it seems to be unclear whether it's a door or a plug. Would you agree with that? But you've seen the other.
I have the unredacted version.
Is that clear?
That was absolutely a dialogue up front. Is it a door or a plug? I'm sorry, maybe not in the SAT. The access that was needed, I apologize for that. In the SATs, as I think about the SAT, it was we need help, we need access to the door, we need a stand.
I see. So where did that discussion occur, whether it was a door or a plug? Not in this, I don't see it in the SAT.
I want to be really respectful. In the factual report on the public record, it was referenced that we had the SAT, but we also had looked at some text between mechanics or other things, and that's where I had seen that.
Understood. Okay, great. I have a question. I have a question about the tier change, and I know there've been lots of questions, and so Leonie, if the tier change, we go from 1 to 2 on September 14th. If you can show that. Scroll up a little. Okay, it may not be here, but on the unredacted version, it's in bold, tier change 1 to 2 with $signs on both sides. And then on the 17th, it goes from 2 to 3, again, bold, tier change 2 to 3, meaning it's elevated, there's urgency, we need this addressed, again, $signs. 18th, it goes back to 3 to 2, $signs. There are other automatic notes in here without $signs. Why the $signs? What does the $sign mean?
The $sign is what the system uses when it gets elevated in a tier level. So when it gets elevated to a tier level, the $sign references the elevation process of the tier process.
It has no reference to, I just want to make sure I'm clear. It has no reference to, hey, this has been going on quite a long time. This is costing us money. We need assistance.
I have no idea why the $sign is the sign that is used when you elevate it, but it is. It is the sign. It has been elevated in a tier level.
Okay.
That change was set up in the tool long before I got here.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to clarify.
Thank
Member
you.
Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Lund, I want to thank you for taking us through the flow of the unit number in question. I do have some clarifying questions on that. You did state on flow day 9 that there's a fit and fair check. Is that correct? And it's
Yes.
external only?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the door work and the door being removed happened on flow day 10, and I think there was about 3 days in there. Would that have triggered this to be done again?
To be checked again.
In a perfect world?
In a perfect world, as a part of reinstalling that plug, we would recheck the fit and fair.
Okay. Did that happen in this case?
There's no documentation that I've seen that happened in this case.
For removing the door plug, is it only a door crew member that can remove and reinstall the door plug? Is that fair to say, or can somebody else?
Well, I would say we just had that conversation. I believe it is a door crew responsibility, but I was reminded, and accurately so, that people like AOG or other highly trained employees that are multi-skilled can also do it.
Okay. So I talked earlier in panel 1 about the process that when the nonconformity on the rivets was identified and basically a NCO was written, that would not necessarily trigger a removal to be written yet. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Who would trigger a removal to be written? Would it be Spirit going, hey, I need the door open so I can do the rivets?
Ideally, yes. And then the employee who realizes they need to open the plug, and we talk about this all the time, so I'll just respectfully say plug, not door, because the door is a different circumstance. But with the plug, when an employee says, I need to open the plug, that employee needs to say, before I open this previously installed assembly or action, I need to go get a removal. And so it's that employee's responsibility to, in September, write the removal or ask for help from someone to write a removal before parts are removed from the airplane.
Okay, so since a Spirit employee or contractor cannot do that, then it has to be a Boeing employee that helps them.
It does.
Okay, let me ask Spirit, do your people that worked on the rivets and inspect the rivet work, do they see the NCO?
Yes, they have access to CMIS, and they have the ability to stamp within CMIS.
And they have the ability to stamp it, correct? Do they
Correct.
see the paperwork for a door removal?
I don't believe that they saw that information.
Okay. Ms. Lund, do they have access to see that paperwork?
They didn't, my understanding, and Mike knows better than me, have access to see really the part of the paperwork that applies to their work statement only.
Okay. Now, when I asked you earlier about the process, when they finish their work, there is a stamp on the NCO by the mechanic that did the rivet work. There's a buy-off by Spirit's QA inspector. And then you said that Boeing would buy it off, but after the door plug is installed?
No.
Okay.
For the NCO, for the
Okay.
rivets in and of themselves, they would stamp it after the Spirit quality inspector for that NCO. That NCO just says, fix these 5
Yeah.
rivets. So
Okay.
they'll stamp that.
So the Boeing's going to come in and inspect the work and buy it off.
Yes.
And I think, if I'm correct, I saw that on the NCO on 9/19 at 1811, that a Boeing quality inspector bought off and stamped that, if I remember on the NCO correctly. At that point, the door, I believe, would still be open, the door plug.
I believe that is true.
What should that have triggered next? Should the inspector have called for a reinstall or what?
Yes. So the next step would be likely the manager in the area to say the next job that we need to go complete is the reinstallation of this plug.
Okay,
or
the
the team
manager,
lead.
but not the
Manager or
quality
team
inspector.
lead, not the quality inspector.
Okay, so there was an opportunity missed there to see that there was, the removal paperwork was not there.
Correct. Because that inspector
And
came to
then
buy off their NCO.
We don't see anything from a manager stating anything like that
Correct.
in the documents.
Correct.
So we have a gap. Thank you, Chair.
Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for both of you, if you could just kind of follow me through here. According to the manufacturing records and human performance factual report, the 4 bolts that prevent upward movement of the door plug were installed by Spirit on July 28th, 2023. The factual report indicates further that that was done during the completion of a specified production order. Those details all appear, just FYI, on page 12 of the factual report. Do either of you dispute this narrative that the 4 bolts were installed by Spirit on July 28th?
I do not.
I do not.
And is there any evidence that you know of? I do not. Is there any evidence that you know of that the door plug was reopened between the date the 4 bolts were installed, which again is July 28th, and the date the fuselage was delivered to Boeing, which I believe was August 31st, 2023?
There is no evidence that I know of.
I do not know of any other.
So is there agreement between Boeing and Spirit that the 4 bolts were properly installed and in place at the time the fuselage was delivered to Boeing?
I believe they were.
Thank you. This next question, I'm not suggesting there's anything untoward about this at all. I just want to factually clarify. I think it's Exhibit 11A, no need to pull that up, but Exhibit 11A shows a photograph of labeling on the door plug, and that labeling indicates that it was intended for line unit 8799. The fuselage on which it was installed was actually 8789, so those two numbers don't match up. Is there anything particularly unusual or problematic about that?
No. Within Spirit's production system, the use of reallocations is available for us when there could be part availability or concerns with the original installation. There could be another installation that's used in its place.
Okay, thank you. Similar sort of question, not suggesting there's any issue at all, Ms. Lund. This, just for clarification, it's my understanding that there's a security video system in the factory, and that video is retained at least for some period of time. There is no video footage of 8789 during production. Could you just explain why that's the case?
I believe, I understand that security footage, it writes over itself every 30 days. And because the airplane was built in the September timeframe, the accident occurred in January, at which point we went to go look at the footage. It had been rewritten over itself because it's a 30-day time frame that it's kept for.
So this is frankly not unlike the cockpit voice recorder issue. It's been overwritten and it's no longer available.
That is correct.
Just for, actually, Chair, I'm going to save my questions for the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll do Member Brown's questions later in the interest of time, so Member Inman.
Thank you. So, Mr. Riley, let me just go back. You originally, at the very start, I know that seemed like hours ago, and it may have been a couple hours ago, said there were no significant issues in the manufacturing of the door plug that were found. Is that correct?
Correct.
What rises to significant?
In my mind, it would be replacement of structure that was original to the door.
The reason I bring that up, in the manufacturing records and human performance factual, it mentions that there were discrepancies that were found during the manufacture, specifically for the mechanics not recording the torque wrench and serial numbers in the production order, and for not providing the sealant/paint information in the production order. I did say they were later corrected in the system, but they were additionally found as an issue. Do you see that as a recurring issue?
No, there's processes in place to have those addressed by engineering when they are identified.
There's
So-
also processes in place to close the door whenever it's taken out.
Agree.
Can we, I also want to just go back, and we were talking about the timelines, especially I was interested about the question on the blankets. Did we actually identify that the blankets were installed? I know that it was okay to install on September 20th. Were they installed on that date, or do you know, Ms. Lund?
The blankets were mostly installed. I believe the picture that was shown earlier in the presentation showed a blanket kind of pulled back out of the way. So we were, that shows they weren't fully installed at that point. Then the okay to install was given. I believe it was on the 20th. And at that point, it did proceed. The blanket was dropped back down and the rest of the build proceeded.
Okay. Can we pull back up the Boeing manufacturing timeline that she referenced earlier? I'm just going back to this just to try to understand something on here. It was on 9/15, and again, it was flow day 10. where we talk about the tier 2, on the 16th and 17th, those were weekend days, right?
Correct.
But it appears that this got elevated to a tier 3 in the stat tracker, and I'm going to go to the stat tracker in a moment. And then it was also the door crew manager made notes, or other managers did. Was that a Sunday production time?
That would imply to me that people were working on Sunday.
So would that have also been another flow day 10?
It was sitting in flow day 10. The difference in a team day or a business day and a weekend is we don't load new jobs. It's not a day we typically move the airplanes. It's a day when we would complete incomplete work if we have a team working or catch up on something.
Would that be Boeing personnel or contractors?
Boeing doesn't have manufacturing contractors. All of our employees are fundamentally IAM employees. They're full employees. And so it's Boeing personnel. And if Spirit were to work on that day, it would be their contractors, if we have heard.
Okay. So can we pull up then, just to go ahead and get to that then, page 26 of the manufacturing records, human performance. So this is actually kind of a chronology. I know earlier the chair was looking at showing a lot of different things in here, and I'm going to actually ask Mr. Ronnie again. Earlier, you also said that you don't have access to the SAT. Is that correct?
Correct.
There's a lot of references in here in this group factual report. Now, specifically, if we can drop down just a little bit. Okay, we can stop. So I'm going to go back to, say, the per Spirit management on September 15th, access and removal are needed. That is a Boeing employee putting that in there?
Correct.
So even on September 18th, doors being opened by a mechanic at 11 a.m. per Spirit manager, access is now available?
That would also be a Boeing employee inputting those comments.
And so they're entering comments on your behalf?
Correct.
Okay. And this is happening again on, I believe, the 18th was a Sunday? Sorry, 17th. We'll go back.
The 18th is a Monday.
Yeah. On the 17th, no access, and it was elevated at that point on this Sunday at 3:54 from a tier 2 to tier 3, which obviously, as you said, it's a lot more notice throughout the plant. On a Sunday, it's elevated. LSCC, and who is LSCC?
Glide Side Control Center, the group of employees who are next to the airplane that help.
Okay, they're going to coordinate with the first shift to gain the access, which includes opening and removing. And then at 6:15, the senior manager worked with the door crew manager to determine if the door can just be opened or if it needs removal. That gives me the appearance that Spirit and Boeing were all trying to get this plane done on a Sunday. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then at 7 a.m., whenever the first crew comes on, it was downgraded right then from tier 3 to tier 2, got it out of the management's review,
At least a level down, yes.
saying that it was doors being opened by the mechanic. And I guess the question is, if the door crew manager was knowing at that point, was it the manager who would have anticipated writing the order for removal, or was the mechanic who was getting the instruction?
The mechanic typically writes the removal
And so it's a mechanic.
at that time.
At that time.
Now it's yes.
So at some point between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. on September 18th, that door was opened.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm over my time. I'll wait for a minute or two. No, I'll tee up another one. Thank you.
Great. No, you're fine. Mr. Riney, question, per contract for your contractors, what are the hours and days that they work?
When requesting contractors, we state that they need to be available either first shift or second shift. And it's typically a Monday through Friday work week, but there is overtime available.
There is overtime. You mentioned earlier Monday through Friday, typically unless the weekend's required from about I thought you said 6:30 to 2:30 or
6 to 2:30 is
6 to
the
2:30.
normal first shift hours.
Does it, we interviewed mechanics who reported working 6 to 7 days a week pretty regularly and normally working anywhere between 10 to 12 hours a day. One said that's just our typical schedule looks like, but in an 8-hour shift contract. So on paper, it seems to be weekdays from, 6 to 2:30. There was reference to 8 to 4, but in reality, these individuals said they pretty regularly work 10 to 12-hour days, 6 to 7 days a week. Does that surprise you?
Not normally. They do work extended hours or multiple days, and that's normally by choice. If we have the work available, it's a voluntary basis.
A Boeing employee said there is pressure to get things done on the floor. One said, yes, it's always go, go, go. Another said their priorities are figure out why jobs are behind schedule. Job behind schedule, or JBS, seems to be a common acronym. And then they go on, that seems to be the big push. It seems to be more important than knowing your own employees, making sure we're on schedule. The contractor, in response to us asking about whether that person feels pressured to complete work or they're looking to do overtime, they had made very clear, many contractors had made clear it's not for overtime, but that there's pressure to do work. When asked who applies the pressure, the response is Boeing. Because basically it seemed like a block for them to install their labs, a block for them to install the floorboards. So because they're trying to meet demand, it's pressure there. Like it needs to get done today and the power's off on this plane, but we have to have it back tomorrow and it's in this flow day or that flow day and they have to get done. Another one said, when we're very overwhelmed with the work, it is pressing because everything we've cut down on some personnel. So now it's like in order for me to not have to deal with the worst situation tomorrow, I'd rather work 12 to 13-hour shift today to get it done because the pressure is very heavy. It does get heavy. I feel like, does that concern you, that there is pressure for your contractors or that they feel pressured?
I think the very nature of why we're there, our entire job is to get out of Boeing's way. We understand that we are inhibiting them from their follow-on activities for their build. I don't see it as us standing over them, telling them that they have to get it done in an unsafe or a manner that would inhibit quality of the product. Their role is to perform the rework and allow Boeing to continue with their build.
Would you agree that these contractors and others who feel that there is pressure to work, that fatigue and that pressure can have an impact?
Yes, and that's why we offer the overtime as a voluntary basis. It's not a requirement.
Are you tracking how much overtime is being worked?
I view the time cards of the individuals.
From a safety perspective?
The mechanics that I talk to, they understand their role as the work that they're performing, and I believe that they are there to perform that role, and they have not elevated those types of issues, the fatigue or unwillingness to come in on a weekend or that type of thing.
Well, they certainly made very clear to our investigators that this is an issue. So if they haven't raised it, perhaps that's something you should be looking at
I will definitely
from
follow
a safety perspective.
I will definitely follow up with them.
Okay, thank you. I know I'm at time or overtime, so member, not Chapman. Graham. It's a long day.
AU works too. Just a couple questions, a couple more. Whether the door plug is just open where it goes out, 15 degrees on the lanyard, or if it's laid all the way out and removed, is a removal required?
Yes,
And why is that?
because even to open it a little bit, bolts must be removed from the
All
plug.
four, correct?
I believe so.
Yes. I double
Yes.
checked yesterday. Okay.
Yes.
So I think some people were a little confused. If you just open it a little bit, no, you got to take them all four out. That's a big deal. Where else would somebody on the line see the removal paperwork? It's in CMES?
Yes,
Okay. Would there be any mention of it at the shipside action tracker?
there could be, as has been referenced here.
And that's just a communication like, hey, I need a removal,
Yep.
or hey, I need a reinstall. Hopefully that would trigger somebody to be looking for that removal paperwork.
Right.
Okay. I want to thank both the witnesses. That's all the questions I have here. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Just to put it out there, Boeing's initial review and reviews since have determined, you've not found any paperwork indicating that this door was authorized to be opened and then authorized to be closed. Is that correct?
We've not found any paperwork. That is correct.
Member Inman went through the details of what's in the SAT record, which indicates that the door would have been opened, the door plug would have been opened on the morning of September 18th. 7 o'clock, there's an entry, the door is being opened by a mechanic. 7:17, another entry, the door is being opened per the door crew manager. At 10:05, there's an entry indicating that a Spirit manager confirmed that access was available. I assume what that means is that access was available to do the repair work on the rivets.
That is the way I read it too.
Okay. At what point during this apparent timeline should there have been a trigger for a requirement for the paperwork?
The paperwork should be filled out and completed before the act of removing the part from the airplane or opening the plug. So when the employee who is ready to open the plug, before they open the plug, they need to fill out the removal paperwork and then proceed with the removal. That's where it should have occurred.
So we have entries in the morning of the 18th, and these are basically for communications purposes,
Correct.
indicating that the decision basically has been made to open the door. We never see the actual paperwork. We just know that the door got opened. So it was somewhere in that window that the discrepancy from what should have been the procedure occurred.
Correct.
Should the lack, I mean, ideally, should the lack of documentation have prohibited continuation of the work?
Yes.
And similarly, should the lack of appropriate documentation have prohibited the final acceptance to close the nonconformance order?
The nonconformance order that was bought off and closed really was for 5 rivets.
Okay.
And it was that Spirit's job and the Boeing inspector's job to, what they were confirming is what was on that NCO. And that NCO only said, these 5 rivets need to be removed and replaced and are discrepant. They looked at it, they looked for the drawing, said, yes, it's good. The inspector doing that would not have necessarily known, now I need to go look for the removal. The removal is a different piece of paper.
Okay.
It has a quality stamp. It would have had the person come and stamp it when we reinstalled from the removal, that's where that quality stamp would have happened. In terms of removing the removals, I don't think that quality inspector, they were there to buy off that piece of paper,
Okay.
which was about the rivets.
So help me with this. Tell me if I've got this right. What should have happened, once the decision was made to open the plug, somewhere soon after that, there should have been essentially a trigger requiring paperwork. The work should not have progressed, ideally, without that paperwork. And then once the work was completed, the removal documentation, that should have then triggered the closing and the signing off of the fact that the plug was closed and secured, right?
That is how it should happen, correct.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. That's my last question.
Thank you, Member Inman.
Thank you. I'm gonna, and I hope I don't drive you crazy, but can you bring up 11L, please? And actually on the bottom of page 41 of the actual document. Uh, 41. Yep, at the bottom of that page. So we're looking at this, and this is one of the, basically a Spirit contractor who had been working at Boeing, I think through a couple of different subcontractors for about 5 years. And the question at line 20 is, you said you're working 6 to 7 days a week, yeah? You guys experienced a bit of fatigue, yes, because it's so demanding to try and keep up with all the work. Sometimes our jobs take really long hours. We'll scroll down a little bit. On to the next page. Sorry. Do you feel pressure to complete the work sometime? Yes. Who is that pressure from? Boeing. Basically seems like a block of time to install their labs. Ms. Lund, what do you think about that?
I feel like there is some inherent pressure to get the job done. I can understand why they feel that. What they're saying is, when you look at the bar chart that was referenced earlier, the next block is somebody else needs this job done so they can complete their job. One of the things we talk a lot about is in aerospace, there sometimes is operational pressure. There's operational pressure to release your airplane on time. There's operational pressure for us to build and deliver an airplane. What can never happen is to sacrifice quality or safety for operational pressure.
Okay. Can we go back to that exact same document, except go to page 54? This was a little disturbing, and I know, Mr. Ronnie, you weren't part of this statement, but it kind of called out a little bit of what may be a bigger issue. Down at the very bottom, line 23 or 21, how do you feel the interaction is between Spirit and Spirit contractors and the Boeing mechanics? Well, basically, we're the cockroaches of the factory, so respectively. I don't know what was respectful about it, but it was a little bit concerning to see that. I guess, Ronnie, what do you have to say to it?
We're outsiders. We're in, as part of our team's presence in the factory, we're in the way. We're doing our best to get out of the way, as I stated earlier. These individuals, they're not Boeing employees, but they are there to perform a job. I have not heard specific instances that Boeing teammates are treating them disrespectfully. I think they just understand that their role is consistently between them and Boeing completing their work, and they are doing their best to remove themselves out of the Boeing team's way. But again, I have not heard specific instances where they've been treated negatively if I would have raised those to the Boeing team, and I have no worry that would have been addressed.
And I realize one employee that's an independent contractor may not be the views of everyone, so I'll just handle that one for you. And I would note in several of the transcripts, a few of the subcontractors said they would suggest to their friends that they should go to work for Boeing first in different ways because everyone has a different reason, flexibility, training, things of that sort. So I don't want to leave that just totally hanging, but it's a very descriptive sentence in a very important issue. And while I have a few more seconds, can we also go jump to page 61? And I guess for the people that are watching, Mr. Ronnie, Ms. Lund, you all have seen all of this before, even before today opened up, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Go down to the bottom on the questioning is basically starting with what safety management systems means. Just something for me looks more like a system for safety is in the airplane. I don't know. I actually don't even know that word. Drop down to the next page, please. Safety culture makes more sense. And if you go down into basically line 12, I don't really think, I think it's just that they have on the walls and that they're talking about it like the 5 S's. And FOD is really, really a big thing. But other than that, they have posters on the wall. I don't really have like a concept thing. Is that a little concerning?
It is concerning. There is no doubt about it. We, as we mentioned earlier, started implementing this safety management system. And I think part of it is that term. You'll notice through here that the employees can talk some of the specifics. They could talk the importance of tool control or compliance. But as we were rolling this out, we did not have it fully to the factory floor when either the AXA 103 panel or at the time of the accident had fully deployed to the floor. This is a big priority of us right now, taking it to the factory floor, helping them understand what the safety management system, helping them understand what their role is in the safety management system. And we had not fully educated the people on the floor, hardly at all, such that they knew what safety management system really meant for them. And that's a deployment of the safety management system that we're working on hard right now.
Chair, if I can have a couple extra seconds. Mr. Ronnie, this is not a name that's redacted. The person who gave this information to us, and as the chair said earlier, the party system is very important. I hope by me calling out this person in their statements, we won't be looking at a situation where they might face adverse action for telling us the truth during their statements. Does that make sense?
Could you state the question again?
Chair, would you like to speak for me? I'm done.
He wants to make sure that by raising these concerns that these contractors will not be retaliated against by Spirit or Boeing.
No.
Okay, so then that I'm going to actually, Ms. Lund. Yeah.
I was just going to concur with Mr. Riney that they will not be retaliated by Boeing for that portion of the question. I'm sorry.
Thank you. An excellent line of questioning. I'll have some questioning along safety culture and SMS tomorrow. But I want to continue on with that line of questioning. I did feel like the comment, this is a very experienced person, somebody who's been on scene in the factory for quite a long time, not somebody who's new, seems to do excellent work. So the term cockroach, which this individual felt, and I'll just give the entire context. The contractor said when asked the question about, it was about the relationship between Spirit contractors and Boeing personnel in the factory. And the response was, well, basically we're the cockroaches at the factory. There's defects and they hold up your job. We're looked at as, it's your fault because how do you do the rework? We do get dogged a lot. And so this seemed to be not a surprise in the interview with Ms. Lund, who said, I do think, which we're working hard to fix, there's a little bit of an us versus them feeling at the front level within Boeing versus Spirit. On the front line, I don't think the front line loves supplier assist. I think their fundamental position that I hear from them on a regular basis is we shouldn't need supplier assist because they should send us these perfect fuselages regardless, and you can't argue with that. It is August 6th. This interview was done in March. What has Spirit done to get information from its workforce on possible pressure, on feeling like they are constantly reworking things in Renton and feeling pressure as this moves through flow? I mean, this was a 9-10 day flow day, which ended up to be 18 days to get this fix done, which can't be good for anyone. And yet you have personnel who are reporting pressure, working long hours, and quote unquote, feeling like cockroaches because they're dogged. What have you done since March to address that issue? Have you gotten feedback from your employees? Have you welcomed feedback? You said you didn't look at the time cards for safety. So what have you done since then?
So specific to the feedback from the team members, I look to my contract managers to provide that if there's individuals that feel that they are having issues. I will personally follow up with them to understand what specifically I can do to help with that.
Well, do you know all those individuals said that there was no feedback system in place for them to provide that? If they don't feel, even if you have one, if they don't feel they don't have that they have a feedback system, how are you going to get that information? You're waiting for them to come to you.
I will discuss with my managers to ensure that they are soliciting that feedback.
Okay, where am I? Okay, question. NTSB has received reports of Boeing employees being isolated. Ms. Lund, can you address that?
I believe the employees that you're referring to in this instance were moved off the line after reviewing the interviews in the information, the text or whatever. There was information that there were 2 employees who were likely involved in the opening of the plug, particularly based on what we referred to earlier. Their manager, their executive manager, the way these decisions are made is by the executive manager. For example, I would be involved if it were a quality employee. I believe the NTSB got a statement from their executive manager, made the decision, which is a standard practice for Boeing. It's a practice that we do frequently, that when question arises about an employee's involvement in a safety-related issue, we will move them to a lateral position, same pay, same benefits, same shift, off the airplane while we finish our investigation. And this is in the interest of airplane safety. We do this as a practice when safety is involved. And that is what occurred with these 2 employees. They were moved, maintaining pay shift benefits, off the airplane while the investigation proceeded.
Are they in a lateral position, or were they put in a lateral position?
They were put in a lateral position in terms of pay, benefits, and shift. Currently, they are being paid on administrative leave, but same pay, and that was at their request.
May I ask 2 more questions? Were they put in something called Building 420, Building 421?
421 is the building where we build our wings.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is the building instead of the 20, which is final assembly. The building next door is the wing building. They were moved to the wing building.
Have you ever heard of that being called Boeing prison? Because it seems to be this is in the transcripts, seems to be something that is talked about.
I did not see it called as Boeing prison. The jobs that they went to do were reworking tooling. Their initial project was to rework some tension barriers, straps that have tension in them. It's our tooling. It's an area that we use for employees who can't perform their statement of work due to light duty, or if we've moved them off the airplane, but it's tooling rework. It's work that needs to be done by our Boeing employees. And I will say, I've been to that area. I've seen that area. I'm familiar with that area. And I was not familiar that they call it Boeing prison.
It was referred to in our transcripts as Boeing prison in a cage. Is one of the individual work from home right now?
My understanding is both are.
Both are. Okay, I'm going to come back to this tomorrow when we get to safety culture. Member Graham? Chapman? Member Inman?
A little bit more. If we can pull back up 11L, please, and go to page 73. Or actually, hang on that. That's fine. Just hold off. Mr. Ronnie, I'm just curious. You at the very first of your testimony, you started to say each day, and I think you were going to say Excel. You get an Excel or spreadsheet, maybe. Is that correct?
It's a document that is provided by Boeing every morning that details, it's an Excel spreadsheet that details the defects documented the previous day. And it's a way for us to, because we don't have access to all of the Boeing systems, it's a way for us to understand what's work is still remaining open.
And is that then put on what they call the board? There was a lot of discuss about the board.
Yes, so again, because we don't have access to the Spirit system in Boeing, we utilize a large monitor provided by Boeing where the mechanics, contract mechanics will utilize a handheld scanner, scan the printed out paperwork, barcode. It will auto-populate, and it allows us to understand what mechanics are working where within the factory.
And it's an easy way for your people also to kind of see who's had discussions with other people. They may put notes in there or attach photographs.
There's no attachments. Yeah, it's only notes of if they may be held for access or waiting on a part or that type of thing.
Okay. And so was that data, did we get to review that information on the board?
I don't believe that was provided as part of the
Okay, so can we go
investigation.
Can we go to page 73 on 11L, please? We'll go down to the bottom and I'd note that this statement is taken on March 4th. And it talks about the Spirit Access Board where you make notes. Question is it archived? You know, it goes back each month. You go back and try to find. Yes, I do know. Recently, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know what, somebody fumbled, but it deleted an amount of data like 2 to 3 months. Then we started right back up. You know how to autosave sometimes? They couldn't. I think they only tracked it back to like January, the beginning of January. Was that data fumbled or erased? Or do you have any information of where it might be?
Again, it's not a lot of data. It's only for the manager to understand where the individual is assigned. So it's not any kind of proprietary data. It's not specific. It's mainly the line unit and the NCR and the date that the mechanic. It's more of a tracking system again for where the mechanic worked that day. Boeing has all that information available that they could pull through the mechanic's BEMS ID for when they stamp on the paperwork. But this is more just a tracing tool for the managers to understand what was being worked.
Do you remember when that data was fumbled?
because I don't utilize it, it's mainly the contract managers. It's not something that is tracked by me. It's more, like I said, just a tool for my managers to understand who's working where that day. It's not a significant part of our process. It was just something that we put in place to help.
I'm done for, thanks.
Well, I'll check in a second because I'm hoping, Ms. Lund, can you clarify sort of the shield in, shield out process when you're on the factory floor?
Yes, the shield process is the name of the process we were referring to earlier, that when you walk into an area, if it's not your home area, the employees who work there every day are assumed to work there, but when you go to visit the area, whether you are a contractor or someone working out of position or even a manager, when we come into the area, we use our badge and we wand in the area, and then when we leave the area, we wand out of the area. And that process that we used to do that is the shield process.
Thank you. And the wanding in and wanding out, is it with your badge?
It's a computer system. The baseline is it's the badge. You use your badge. It comes up. It asks you what you're doing in the area, what area you're going to be working on, what you're going to be doing, and you fill that out, and then you have access to the area. And then when you leave, you check out through that shield.
And do you need some sort of pre-approval, or you can go in and out depending on your work?
It says if you're going to work on the aircraft and it's a live aircraft, you need to touch base with the GC. As I mentioned earlier, that check-in needs to happen. But from a management perspective, when I check in, I say, I'm going to walk around the airplane, or I'll be just walking, not performing any work on the aircraft, and I can walk in.
And is there some sort of way to track who's shielding in and shielding out? Where is that kept?
It's kept in the system from the shield data that we use to go in and out. I will say there are times the system goes down for whatever reason, then we go back to a paper system and we keep the paper records also.
How long do you keep those records?
I don't know the answer to that.
Understood. The reason why I'm asking is, in this case, if you were opening, removing, closing a door plug, you would be entering an area where you would be shielding in and shielding out, or wanding in and I'm trying to use the right.
Yes, right, yes. Any of those words will work, yes,
Agree.
yes.
Yes. And so on these particular days, do you know who shielded in and shielded out?
We have a record of employees who were in the area, yes.
Is there ever a time where somebody doesn't shield in or shield out?
Per process, they should, but I'm sure there is. And as I said, employees who work in the area every day don't shield in and shield out. But per process, if you're entering an area that's not your homework area, you should use the shield system or the documentation.
The reason why I'm asking is we had seen throughout several interviews where some people don't shield out. They might go to lunch, they may go to the restroom, they may go on break. And so having that record, that's a process that doesn't exist. So a record that does not exist. Is that something you've looked at or you are looking at? Also a safety issue, but.
Yeah, it's a good question. We track particularly the entering in, so we know who's in the area. If you don't shield out, your manager actually gets a notification that this person didn't shield out, but that's several hours later. Or at the end of shift. I've gotten notifications at the end of shift that someone didn't shield out of an area. You go back, you check, you try to fix the record. I don't know if we have an active improvement activity right now on working, particularly as you mentioned, on the shield out, the wand out process, or all of it. I don't know if we have an improvement activity on that.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one more. Member Chapman had asked about the recording, the security video. Have you changed the length of how long you keep that at all?
I believe today it is still 30 days.
Okay, great. Member Chapman. Member Inman.
Just a quick question, and this is I often found people who are not involved in this so much like we are. one thing that we have not mentioned is actually being able to interview the door crew manager. And so that person is on a medical leave. I think we've established it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so it's not for any reason that anybody's been withheld for that door crew manager.
No,
And
that,
I think our investigators have verified that as well.
that's right. And that
So-
manager is still on leave of absence.
Truly understand. One other question, this may be about production itself and going back just a little bit, but we talked about when the door plug was originally created and put in. It looks like it's at the start, or sorry, not the door plug. When an open hole for a door plug, it started with the max line itself. Has anyone ever ordered it with the emergency exit?
To clarify your words, with a working door?
Yes.
Yes.
That's,
Yes.
a lot, a little?
I don't believe it's most, but we have airplanes in our line regularly that have the working door.
Is that something?
We have certain customers that order a lot of airplanes
Okay.
that have
I
the
know that
working
they-
door.
that-
Yeah.
Spirit, is that something that's also, you're reworking some of your procedures in regard to what we're seeing now? It may have been a confusing question.
So if I understand you correctly, the door plugs and all doors were part of an enhanced inspection process that Spirit began performing.
The reason I mentioned it during the earlier display with some of your representatives, they showed a graphic of a plane, and what was in blue was Spirit's, but the entry exit door, the main passenger door, was not in blue, it was in white. And I think we clarified that you also manufacture it, you just don't design it.
So correct, there's design responsibility for the certain parts of the fuselage, and the forward entry door is one that Boeing has the design responsibility for. The other passenger doors and access doors, Spirit has design responsibility for.
So if you have the design responsibility for the door plugs, going back to Vaseline versus dishwater soap, are you responsible for that portion of the overall input, or is it something Boeing is?
I would have to follow up with our team to ensure that if that's something that we is part of a planning operation or part of a specification for what lubricants are allowed to be used.
Just in general, okay. That's all I've got.
I just wanted to clarify two things. Training for the door crew. In 2020, you mentioned, Ms. Lund, foundational training and on-the-job training. In 2023, was there recurrent training? Or is it all on the job after you do the foundational at that time?
We have some level of recurrent training across the board. There are certain courses that are recurrent. In terms of door crew specific, the majority of the training is on the job. I cannot answer with certainty right now whether there are certifications. If it takes a certification to do a job, that is a recurrent training. I cannot answer that specifically.
No,
Sure, our friends can, but I can't. I'm sorry.
Thank you for that. And my last question is, how do you prioritize work on flow days when there is rework? Is it constant reprioritizing? How does that work?
Yes, that's part of the negotiation we do. In each of our flow days, we have, as I mentioned, sort of a critical path, a specific statement of work. Those are the ones that will be prioritized because they're the airplanes that has a strong precedent network to the follow-on jobs. So that will tend to be a priority. Anything that needs to be done in position due to a product safety or personal safety issue will be prioritized in that position. For example, there are some areas where it becomes very difficult to access the airplane once you move out of the structural tool to get on top of the airplane. So that we like to do in position. Those would be the things that we would prioritize first. And those are the kinds of elements that will drive the elevation in that SAT system as well. If something really needs help because we need it done before it needs to move to the next position, that would be an elevated issue in the SAT. So we prioritize it based on critical jobs, critical flow of jobs, personal safety, product safety.
Okay, thank you. Member Brown has about 7 questions that if it's okay with you, we're gonna, the investigative team will send them in writing. You can provide a written response maybe within 7 days. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds very reasonable.
And then we'll put it publicly in the docket for people to review. Is that all right?
Happy to do that.
Perfect. Back to the technical panel in case you have some follow-up questions. Oh, we're good, right? Over here. Yeah, great.
No further questions, Chair.
Parties, do you have any further questions for this panel? ALPA,
No, ma'am.
Alaska,
No, ma'am.
AFA,
Not at this moment.
Mr. Gerlach.
Thank you, no chair.
Okay, and IAM.
Thank you. I just have a follow-up on the discussion around the isolation of the 2 door crew. Did the company evaluate and isolate any managers that failed to identify that a removal was to occur?
The manager would have been evaluated. It would have been the door crew manager who is out on medical leave. By definition, he was already not working on the airplane, so that evaluation process did not happen.
We saw in the SAT documentation other managers that were engaged in the discussion about whether a removal was required. So there was other employees that were engaged in that. Were any of those investigated?
I believe we, and I'm speaking for my colleague, as I'm stating for his statement on behalf of Boeing, I believe they looked at the group of employees that per the data, the collective set of data, appeared to have been noted as involved in or asked to open the plug. It was that group of employees that were reviewed.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much. And Spirit.
No further questions, Chair.
So no further questions from the parties. Technical panel's okay. Board of Inquiry. All right. That concludes panel 2 and day 1 of this investigative hearing. So on behalf of the Board of Inquiry and the technical panel, I want to thank all the parties for their participation. I really want to thank the witnesses. I know it was a very long day. We appreciate your patience, appreciate your being forthright with your answers to your questions. And just as a final reminder, we ask that all witnesses be present for the entire hearing, again, both days. So please be here back in the boardroom. Unless you've coordinated in advance with the hearing officer, you may be recalled. I don't believe we have any new exhibits, correct? All right, the transcripts are scheduled to be available within 7 days of the completion of the hearing. As a safety agency, we certainly take fatigue very, very seriously. So just a reminder for the Board of Inquiry to refrain from contacting NTSB staff after we leave here today so that they can get some sleep and rest and be prepared for tomorrow. But if you have additional questions or need assistance, Tim LeBaron, Dana Schultz, Dave Helson, and Brian Curtis are available to help you. To the technical team, you did an excellent job. Thank you. I hope you do get home tonight and get some rest. We stand adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.